Welcome to the Indian Council of World Affairs, India's oldest foreign policy think tank.
Many people interested in foreign policy have told me when they come to the Indian Council of World Affairs in Sapru House, they feel a great sense of affinity with this institution because this was where the serious study of international relations in India all began.
The ICWA was set up by a small group of public intellectuals some years before our independence, because they felt it important that India have an independent perspective on international affairs. Since then, the ICWA has gone from strength to strength, and it has been a long journey, almost 75 years. One particular milestone in that journey was in 2001, when the Indian Parliament passed an act declaring the ICWA to be an institution of national importance. We thus became a publicly funded independent think tank. Our governing council is headed by the Vice President of India, and the External Affairs Minister is its Vice President. We have three focus areas. The first is research, which is carried out by in-house faculty. Very rigorous research on different parts of the world, encompassing the domain of area studies.
The Council has been very proactive in conducting dialogue and discussion on African affairs and India-Africa relations in order to promote an understanding on African affairs in India, an Indian perspective on Africa, given the priority that now Africa has in Indian foreign policy.
Within the Council, we have a renewed focus on Latin America and the Caribbean region. So we're looking through our studies to find new areas of cooperation such as renewable energy, climate change and the space technology.
Interacting with leading experts, diplomats, media persons and academicians has helped me nurture my research further.
We recently had the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Outlook, which has a lot of convergence with the India's own Indo-Pacific construct.
The learning curve at the Council has been tremendous, and it provides a strong foundation for my future research.
The second is policy. Because we are a think tank, and being close to policy, commenting on policy, and helping formulate policy is an essential part of our functioning.
I think in the new age, what we're seeing much more of is that people want to be involved in foreign policy thinking. They want to have a voice. Now this is where ICWA comes in.
This is the platform where I for many years have come and interacted with the best in the world.
ICWA provides a valued platform for visiting foreign dignitaries to interact with informed Indian audiences. The third is outreach. This is most important because of our role as a public-funded independent think tank, and we carry this out by associating ourselves with as wide an audience in India as is possible. Colleges, universities, other think tanks, and of course with similar institutions elsewhere in the world.
What I would call the democratization of Indian foreign policy. It has moved to distant corners of the country. It is no longer a preserve of Delhi.
ICWA has a robust publications program which includes papers by the in-house faculty, invited papers and commentaries, and books on foreign affairs by not only former diplomats and established academics but also by upcoming scholars. Our journal, India Quarterly, is being published since 1945. ICWA's publications are also being translated into various Indian languages. What is ICWA's role as we move into the future? The vision of the institution is to stay abreast of all the momentous changes taking place in the domain of foreign policy. New areas are emerging. There are strategic technologies, there is climate change, there is artificial intelligence, and there is cyber security. How can our research faculty and the audiences that come here be better informed about developments in these areas? How can we write and formulate research papers to give policy inputs that help in government policy formulation? These are the emerging challenges for ICWA and form a part of our vision for the future.
Okay. We are live, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I would like to welcome you all for the panel discussion on redefining national logistics post-COVID-19, India and global supply chains. In the ongoing disruption in the logistics sector due to the pandemic, we have seen that India can have opportunities as well as problems. What will be those opportunities that India can benefit from? How can India overcome problems that India is facing? And what will be the policy measures which are required to make India a global logistics hub? These are some of the questions that we will discuss. We have a distinguished panel with us. The session will be chaired and moderated by Mr. Dilip Chenoy. He is currently Secretary General of Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Before joining FICCI, Mr. Chenoy served as Managing Director and CEO of National Skill Development Corporation. We have Mr. Sridhar, L Sridhar with us. Mr. Sridhar is one of India's logistics pioneers and is a founder of Connect India e-commerce services. Connect India acts as a two-way logistics hub wherein it sells products from rural areas to urban areas and brings urban areas to rural areas as well. We have with us Lieutenant General Pannu with us. He has had a long and illustrious career in the Indian Army. He retired as Deputy Chief of Integrated Staff. We also have Mr. Madhav Thapar. Mr. Thapar is currently Vice President leading the South Asia region for C.H. Robinson Global Forwarding. Mr. Thapar has vast experience in the field of global logistics and he is also an accomplished author. On the panel, we have Mr. Parthsarathi Trivedi, who is a co-founder and CEO of Skylo India. He was recently named in the Forbes list of 30 under 30 for Asia. And finally, we have Mr. N Sivasailam, who is an experienced civil servant and has a demonstrated experience in the field of logistics. He is known as Metro Man of Karnataka because he played a key role in building first phase of Bangalore Metro. Just a small announcement for audience. Audience can ask their questions by typing in the live chat. And I'll hand over proceedings to Mr. Chenoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sankalp, and very good afternoon. And I just want to begin by hoping all the people who are participating and all the panelists and their families and their organization, everybody is safe and keeping well. Delighted to be here this afternoon with such a distinguished panel of speakers, and I'm sure we will have an exciting session. So we are actually having this in the middle of what perhaps is an unprecedented scenario in the world and a pandemic. And I think if there's one sector which has been greatly impacted by this and will be impacted by it going forward is the logistics sector. And therefore, I would like to compliment the ICWA for organizing this redefining national logistics post-COVID-19 India and the global supply chains at this point of time. So, of course, there has to be new normal for logistics. And what is a new normal? I'm sure the panelists will talk about. Second, there's this whole issue of globalization and regionalization, which is not equal to Atmanirbhar Bharat. And we need to actually understand the distinction between that. And I think the panelists will talk about, what would be the post-crisis logistics hubs, or, how could India emerge at a regional level? And how do we actually move away from single source of single logistics provider dependencies? I think that's what's also there. And how do we establish flexible supply chains? I think before COVID, just in time was what we were talking about. And I know that we have a panelist in technology, but will just in time move away and give way to just in case? And, I think that is something which we need to actually look at how, we look at the future. We were talking about high logistics costs in India, and I'm sure Mr. Sivasailam will put all of that. And, NCR had done exemplary work in determining the logistics costs and looking at routes and creating, some kind of indices there. But that also is something which we will talk about. And then how do you rebalance and reallocate resources in this point of time? So if India has to develop the logistics hubs and, make this a center, how much resource can we spend there versus resource on, sustaining, reviving, and thriving of the other sectors of the economy. And going forward, the role of digital technology is going to play a great, it's actually going to transform the entire logistics sector. And just before the panel, I was just talking about how, this e-card and this toll card has actually changed a lot of things, and the e-way bill is changing the logistics experience in India. And then human resources is critical because one of the things that came out very, very strongly in the COVID era was that, there were trucks but no drivers. There were delivery vehicles and packages to be delivered but no people. So how do we actually make this a very exciting place to work in going forward? So with those introductory words, I'd like to, first bring in, I'll just go by the order that all of you were introduced. Would like to request Mr. L Sridhar to make his opening statement for about 7 to 8 minutes, and we'll go across the panel and then have a brief interaction and then go for questions. Mr. Sridhar, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dilip. I think it's privileged to be having amongst such a wonderful panelist with multivariate experience from the government, international, as well as the private sector. Now, to just give you a little bit of a brief about myself, I think I've been very lucky to be associated with this industry for the last 42 years. The industry has grown with me and I have grown with the industry, and I have seen, fortunately, the entire logistics, whether it is a document delivery, whether it's a trucking or whether it is, a shipping. I think that multifarious experience has given me a lot more insight into logistics and supply chain. And incidentally, that's turned out to be a passion. So I'm 65 still. I'm very, very active in terms of the business. Now, to take back, if you look at logistics in India per se, if you go back to the 80s, we were only, this was basically only the trucking industry. There was no logistics per se. Late 80s is when the entire courier industry started picking up. The logistics name came in and everybody started naming logistics. But unfortunately, logistics industry also has been a very unorganized sector, because India has, if you look at the trucking business has more than 96 to 97% unorganized players, where 1 or 2 truck owners, and the corporatization in terms of trucking industry had never taken place. But later, I think between 90s and 2000, India transformed into really a supply chain where you had these 3PL companies, multinationals walking into India to invest in logistics because of the huge, this thing. Now, giving this as a background, and I think what has happened is in 2000, while again the entire logistics industry was B2B per se, but in 2012, 2013, when the Amazons of the world and the Flipkarts of the world came in, the digital commerce started. When the digital commerce started, I think the entire, the playing field moved away from B2B to B2C, which means that in a B2B business, you move all 10, 20 packages to an organization, dump it, and then move away. Whereas in a B2C, every single delivery has a kind of a meaning to it. So these were two different kind of animals. Hence, the existing logistics industry did not really, cope up with the demands of the e-commerce industry, which came in 2012-13, where we had about close to 3.5 million to 4 million shipments being delivered every day, and India did not have the infrastructure. The another major problem as far as our country is concerned, India means many people understand only the top 100 locations are the Indian, the industry, but whereas 70% of the population live outside the urban markets, which is where the consumption patterns are also very high, which was unfortunately because of the logistics connectivity and the infrastructure was not available. I think the middlemen mushroomed. But with the emergence of e-commerce industry, what has happened is the penetration started moving deep into rural part of the country. And having worked in the industry for almost about 4 decades, in 2014, we saw a great opportunity in the rural markets whereby we found that the business, the consumption pattern in rural was very high, but unfortunately they did not have the logistics connectivity. So if we are able to provide the urban to rural connectivity, I think the opportunities were phenomenal. That's how today Amazon or a Flipkart moved out, and the rural commerce, in fact 2015, we also made a big disruption in the logistics industry where, see, in the entire supply chain, if you really look at it, the major portion, 35% of the cost goes to the last mile piece. If the last mile distribution is not taken care, irrespective of what you do at the first mile or a second mile or a third mile, has no relevance. And that is exactly what you say, what you saw when the COVID hit the country. The last mile was most difficult. But 5 years ago, we realized this, that we created this model of brick and mortar store to be the partners, whereby we've created more than about 10,000 partners in the form of brick and mortar stores in the rural part of the country, and then created close to about 20 to 25,000 jobs and also skilled them in third. So I think there's a great opportunity. In fact, post-COVID, I would say the logistics industry has a great opportunity, because what's going to happen is that as the manufacturing is going to move away from China to maybe not everything to India, maybe partially it will move in, but I think India will get a momentum, because it's already started creating momentum in terms of making India that's happening. So I think the most critical point will be the first mile and last mile. And especially I've been also watching the agri-logistics. Agri-logistics is, again, they are able to find their footprints and how to really connect the last mile and the first mile. There is a huge gap between demand and a supply situation. I think these things would get narrowed down as we go along, because what's going to happen is rural commerce is going to play a very, very major role, and digitalization and technology is going to play a very, very huge role. And if you really look at it between April and today, the most interesting part is the e-commerce business have almost recovered back to 60 to 70%, which is the beauty of our country, which means the bouncing back of the e-commerce. And what is beauty is about is the rural demand is increasing, while you would see, all the metro cities, tier 1 are still under lockdown, whereas the rural part of the country, the demand has come up. So I think this is going to be, and thanks to government, I think government is now playing a very huge role. They have also realized that we have to recognize this as an organized industry, and you will see a lot more role that would come from Government of India to play. And I think logistics has a huge opportunity going forward. It will get more regularized. And I think the most important aspect that will happen is when we do this rural logistics, I think skilling will play a very, very huge role. In fact, I've been telling FICCI that they should create one logistics division, and where we should try and create skill development, because logistics requires a huge amount of skills, whether it is a warehousing, whether it is a last mile delivery, whether it is trucking or whatever it may be, but that nothing is organized. I think we need to get that organized. I think it's a great opportunity. I think with this, I would just give you an overview. I see, as far as I'm concerned, I see the last mile piece is going to be key for both imports, exports, and domestic. If we are able to optimize the cost, we have already brought in a cost where earlier rural deliveries were about 250 to 300, which we brought it down to about 50 to 100 rupees, which means there is going to be huge efficiency that will also come in logistics. And ultimately, the logistic cost on the domestic or international and testing back is what is going to happen. Lot more warehousing happen at the district level, smaller warehousing. I think that's
okay.
what
I think. Thank you, Mr. Sridhar. Thank you for that. For first saying that's a huge opportunity going forward, and then first mile and last mile, and about the importance of rural thing and the agriculture point that you made. So with that, General Pannu, could I move to you for your opening remarks? General Pannu, please.
Thank you, Dilip. Obviously, it goes without saying that I have a military background, and whatever experience in logistics I have is not from the perspective of what is being spoken about. Nonetheless, it is an experience. To say that when my initial comments obviously would come from my background, and then I will connect it with the subject per se. That when you have to fight a war, you have to make sure that you fight economical war. Any nation which consumes huge amount of national resources and exchequers money actually may win a battle, but at the end of it, the nation would have lost war. What I'm indicating is that our logistics have to be in time and they have to be economical. You cannot understock. You cannot provide ahead of time where the man and material is not required, and you cannot not have the resources placed where there's no battle being fought. So therefore, there's a lot of flexibility in sourcing the material, stocking the material, moving at the right place at the right time, and therefore the whole infrastructure which is built and to move and to control is a very, very delicate piece of work that is required to be done. The Indian Armed Forces were building something called a LogiNet. Actually, it is logistic network. But we really found that there were huge amount of challenges because the kind of inventory that has to be actually put onto the system is so big, and you cannot make the difference from one product to the other. And there is to be a lot of mix-up happening, because imagine in millions you have to source arms, ammunition, and spare parts, and what all. So the inventory management, and then moving from the sourced area, that is from production, which is national and international, bringing it to central depots, from central depots to regional depots, and then a lot of bulk breaking would take place, and then sent to forward areas, which is just in time. Now, having said that, coming to the larger issue of our logistics in India, you look at the map of India, we are a country which is a unique in the world, the way we are located as geostrategic importance is concerned. We have over 6,000 kilometers of coastline, and we have I think there is some disrupted communication.
Just go ahead, we're hearing you. Just go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yeah, we are able to
Please go ahead. We're able to hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, there was some disruption in the communication. So over 6,000 kilometers of coastline, and we have the ports, seaports are there. Then a whole lot of logistics are based on the airports. Our movement of hardware, our movement of all the product is based on the trains. It's based on the highways. And also there is storage. So largely, the government of India is responsible to provide the logistics to the country, which is based on the network of airports, seaports, trains, highways, and storage capacities. So really speaking, if you take each one of them one by one, our airports are essentially meant for transporting passengers. Our airports are not suitable for logistic and heavy logistic movement. That is point number one. We don't even have adequate air assets for moving heavy air cargo. We have to rely on normal transportation, which is based on trains. And then when you talk about the trains, we do not have enough sidings. We do not have enough rolling stock. We don't have enough sidings, and we do not have good speed of the trains. And therefore, it takes very long for any worthwhile movement to take place in time and in that volume on a train. Similarly, we have very few seaports which are worth taking up that kind of logistics. Therefore, there is a lot of choking which happens when a ship comes there. it has to wait for very, very long on the seaports to really discharge its cargo. Our highways, of course, are now being built, but a lot of wastage takes place because the traffic is slow and chaotic. And when you talk about godowns, really speaking, government does not invest in godowns. I mean, if you take case in point of food storage, the FCI produces, has storage, but the kind of produce that comes, they cannot even produce enough storage space for that kind of produce that we have in our food. So 50% of our food products are actually lying outside under tarpaulin, which goes waste. As far as the government is concerned, government only can provide for all this, and therefore our logistics are basically responsibility of the government of India and are based on these resources that I'm talking about, and they are all choked. The civil side, or I can say the corporate world into logistics, actually is largely an unorganized sector. And when you have emergency-like situation like COVID, you realize that the unorganized sector, Mr. Sridhar was talking about the trucking business, actually is completely thrown out of gear. And government can do nothing. And government has no idea how to actually patch in the unorganized sector with the organized sector. The organized sector, as it is choking, and it gets overloaded, and you find that all those elements which have to move the goods, the railways are stopped, the airports are all locked up, the highways, of course, the states create a barrier. There are different states running different policies. So everything really comes to a grinding halt. As far as command and control is concerned, I do not think there is any state or in the central government there is any monitoring, control room, or there is any logistic monitoring entity which anybody has got created. So I think all that creates a problem. The way the exponential growth was taking place, which is accelerated acceleration, the kind of population which is growing, I'm told in the next 30 years we were supposed to have 2 billion more people added to this world. Where are we going to get the kind of logistic support for additional 2 billion people? So really speaking, on one side is the human demand is going to grow. On the other side, with COVID kind of a situation, every country goes into a lockdown, and then we start talking about self-reliance, that is Atmanirbharta. Really speaking, nobody can produce anything by itself. World is one big industry, and everything will collapse if we start shutting our borders. We stop sourcing things from outside, nobody can produce anything. We stop our borders, nobody can really go anywhere. So I suppose, the organized sector needs to be organized with strength, and the airports and the seaports and the railway infrastructure and the highways have to add on to the capacities. Unorganized sector has to be moved into organized sector. And I think government and the corporate world has to come together as one seamless entity. And of course, technology is one where the tracking and the supply-demand balancing can happen, so that from where things are produced and to where they are required, that gets a good balance. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General, for actually giving that from your perspective what needs to be in airports, ports, railways, and the road sector. And I'd like to also, Mrs. Sivasailam, you are welcomed in absentia, but since you have joined, I'd like to welcome you here, and at the same time request Mr. Madhav Thapar to please, share his thoughts there. So Madhav, over to you. Mrs. Sivasailam, I'll come to you a bit later because you're giving the real keynote address there. I just wanted to welcome you. So Mr. Madhav Thapar, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I actually have a short presentation, but while that comes up, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through every point on the presentation, and I would definitely like to, not repeat some things which are already covered very well by Mr. Sridhar and by General Pannu. So let me talk about the key themes today, and I think to start with, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the world, and I think it has changed it permanently. So It is not a matter of what we have done in the interim and the exigencies and the business contingency plans that we have had, but it is something that is going to change the face of our business for the foreseeable future. Every adversity also brings opportunity, and there's certainly opportunity arising out of the pandemic when we recover from it. It's not the first time that India has been at the front end of the opportunities. I think when there were tariff wars between USA and China, there was a great expectation that Indian business and Indian trade would benefit. There's a similar expectation to some extent today as some manufacturing starts to move away from China. I will not talk about the sentiments behind that, but there's also, the feeling that all eggs should not be in one basket. However, in the past, India did not optimize on these opportunities. Southeast Asia actually optimized on them much more than our small countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. They benefited. And the first few months of the recovery from the pandemic seem to indicate that things are going in a similar direction. And this should be a cause for concern for us as India, because with our size, our diversity, if we are not really able to take the optimal positioning after such kind of incidents, then I think that something needs to change. The lesson, obviously, in very simplistic terms, has been that these other economies have been much more agile, they have been much more simple, less regulated, and they have been more technology driven. So these are some of the cornerstones. We can go into the slides and I can talk a little bit about them and try and keep, of course, to my time limit. So, Doctor, if you could perhaps move to the next slide. Okay, so I think that some of the things that in the arena that are set to change forever. First of all, we have always talked about integrated logistics supply chains, and the two distinguished speakers before me also made this point. One of the lessons that we have seen from the recent months is a broken chain never works. So we said that even at the height of the pandemic, the ports are open, airports are open, but if there are no officers to pass pieces of paper that are still required, unfortunately, because we are not contactless in the logistics arena, much as we would like to believe to be, we have to become contactless in future. There's still a high level of examination, there's a high level of dependency on physical presence, and if that could not be assured because there was no local transportation, there was no movement of people or of goods. So goods could reach, let's say, a CFS, but then they would get stuck in the container freight station and not be able to move to the loading point. So a broken chain does not work. Any plan that we have for future has to make sure that it remains integrated. It includes distribution and last mile delivery. I think LR made this point very eloquently. The customer wants the goods at their doorstep. The days of dispatch are long gone. These are the days of delivery. The chain does not end until the customer gets the product. We need to further automate. I think automation and digitalization are the two key things, because this pandemic, and I hope we do not see more to come, but nobody can guarantee that, and nobody can guarantee how long this situation will last, has simply brought forward the need for being contactless, to be able to work from remote, and all this is not possible unless we digitalize even more. Pricing. There has been a dangerous tendency, I think, towards regulatory pricing. And I want to just say that logistics cost can only be driven down by free and fair competition. When we talk about digitalization and technology, there's investment required. I don't think the government provides that investment. It is each private player who needs to invest in that. And if there are going to be pricing regulations, it's really difficult for people to be able to find the funding to remain up to standard with what is required globally. There will be a lot more regional traffic. I think that because of this disruption, there will be a lot more movement between intra-Asia, intra-Europe, intra-Americas. People will look at closer markets for supplies to consumption areas. Factories that are agile will function much faster. To give an example, our part of the world has always been an area where we are perceived to have cheap labor costs, and therefore buyers procure from us. But if there's huge investment in technology and a robo can do on a factory floor 90% of the job that a human worker can do, a robo does not need a specific country to operate in. That robo can work even more efficiently, let's say, in Germany than it does over here. So we have to be conscious of these trends, and we have to be careful that we are positioned to counter them before the developed economies start moving in that route. If you would like to move to the next one, please. So, control towers, General Pannu touched on this, but I would elaborate a little further that Indian ports need to develop into multi-country hubs because we have the right positioning to do so. Singapore, Dubai, so many other countries are way ahead of us. They have developed free trade zones. We have these, but they are in their infancy. Our airports, we have the largest number of passengers. We have a huge capacity of flights coming in and out. But again, we focus on the passenger side. We should be able to do transshipments over here, and the transshipment standard for cargo cannot be any more than it is for passengers. If you think 2 hours is a safe window to connect a flight for a passenger, there's no reason why cargo cannot move in that same 2-hour window if we systemize properly. And that is what will make us successful as a transshipment hub. We cannot always have goods going into narrow, limited airport and seaport facilities. We need to develop private bonded terminals. We need to reduce the distances that are to be covered between factories and the places where cargo can be aggregated and consolidated. We need to look at our modal mix. Today road is the majority of our mix, and we have challenges with our highways because there are constraints with the railways. But we have a whole waterway system that can be very successfully utilized if we look at the European and the examples of other developed countries. Multimodal turnarounds. Dubai, even a country like Sri Lanka, Colombo, does a 24-hour turnaround for a movement from sea to air. We don't even have, at this moment in time, a reliable sea-air possibility in India, whereas we can easily be a hub for the Far East. We need to privatize extensively, make these price competitive, make port terminals, airports, the cargo rail network actually compete with each other to deliver optimum value and efficiency to the market. And we need to implement strategic pricing and new solutions so that we can build digital platforms and resilient supply chains. Okay, if we can move on. So, what is the need of the hour in summary? Yes, heavy involvement in technology and digitalization. Really the Internet of Things, blockchain, control towers. Customers will more and more ask logistics providers to help them with demand forecasting. We will have to look at drones. We will have to look at robotics. Right? Physical labor will slowly have to be replaced. This may not be pleasant to hear in a country where we have a lot of jobs at stake and where we have traditionally leveraged labor, but we need to change with the times and recognize that in the end, greater volumes will create greater job opportunities. But if we remain stuck with the old model, we will neither be with the new world, nor will we be able to protect our labor. So, enhancing efficiency throughout the value chain is an absolute imperative if we are to learn the right lessons from this current crisis and move ahead and be able to deal with more crises not only effectively, but also emerge as winners and to position India to take finally advantage of the opportunities that come our way every time something like this happens, but which in the past we have not been able to optimize simply because maybe we have not really focused as much as our competing countries have done. It's never too late. Let's look forward to a more optimistic future for the logistics industry here.
Thank you, Madhav, for that thing. And actually, you have led into Partha's discussion, so you could not have had a better segue into your statement. So over to you, Partha.
Thank you, Mr. Chenoy, and thanks to ICWA for giving me the opportunity to share my observations. I was just in the US about 3 months ago before lockdown. And on a normal basis, when you're shopping on an e-commerce site such as Amazon.com, say you log on to the website and you're surfing, you're finding your favorite product. what goes on behind the scenes is quite remarkable. As you are looking at, your wallet or phone or whatever it is that you want to buy, in Amazon's warehouses, robots are transporting your product to the fulfillment center even before you have added that product to the cart. So predictive algorithms are informing the warehouse that this gentleman is just about to place an order and we need to fulfill it and fulfill it within a day. In the same country today, hospitals have been the first to run out of ventilators, masks, personal protective equipment, and sanitization kits. Why is that? That's a stark sort of disparity. And that difference, that extreme difference, actually comes from a trade-off between efficiency and resilience. The highly efficient systems of supply chains that we have made on a global basis are also extremely brittle when you have a pandemic. It starts to break down. And life-saving supply chains are left vulnerable in that instance. And whereas supply chains were historically built for efficiency, the trend is that going forward, they are increasingly going to be built for resilience. And that means that they're going to become much shorter and much more local. A benefit of shifting towards local sourcing and being more reliant on local suppliers can also bring environmental benefits and make selling and delivering products much easier, eliminating the need for intermediaries. One instance where that's particularly true is agriculture, for instance, where in addition to sourcing locally, the shift in consumer behavior because of this pandemic is going to require a much greater demand for trust on the supply chain. So supply chains are becoming shorter, much more local, and a need for trust is escalating quite rapidly. And so in the setting of agriculture, for instance, there is going to be a much greater demand for goods to be delivered, produce to be delivered directly from the farm to your doorstep. In that regard, for instance, my company, we're launching the world's first 5G IoT network directly over satellite to connect the remotest of farms to trucking companies, where ubiquitous tracking can better match demand and supply in real time to help make our supply chains much more resilient and responsive. As the traceability of goods, produce, the need for those increases, technologies that assist in that process, such as blockchain, are going to gain much more relevance, much more rapidly than anticipated. An acquaintance of me, just to tell you about trust and local production, there's an acquaintance of mine in Mumbai. He's a fisherman by profession, but highly educated. And over the past 3 months, you've been reading about how migrant labor in fisheries have really taken a hit, and the entire maritime sector has been very badly hit. In that instance, what my friend did is he started delivering fish directly from the sea to people's homes over WhatsApp, converting his own car into a delivery mechanism, and employing 600 women to descale, sanitize, and pack fish. That's the kind of rapid change that we're seeing in supply chains. As far as India is concerned, our logistics operations are heavily dependent on labor. And my personal view or observation is that it's not always practical to think that we can replace labor with automation across the board. Rather, I would submit that we have to use technology as a force multiplier to human input, whether that's using AI algorithms to identify supplier-side risk and reorient the supply chain, or whether that's using connectivity to trace trucks and improve turnaround time. And while global supply chains are going to focus on more resilience, we should not expect an overnight shift. We can't expect, for instance, India to automatically replace demand from China. Companies are much more likely to initially follow a China plus one strategy, and the onus is actually on us to ensure that we're delivering international quality product while simultaneously achieving cost targets. And my last point is that the disruption in a global supply chain during a pandemic is second only to that of a war-like scenario. And I'll just give you an example of why we can't take global supply chains for granted. Back in 1950s, 1960s, during the Cold War, the United States was producing a classified spy jet called the SR-71 Blackbird, spy aircraft, to spy against the Russians. But the element that aircraft needed to be manufactured was titanium, overwhelmingly so. And the only source of quality titanium at that time was the Soviet Union. So the CIA set up a very complex channel of shell companies after shell companies through Malaysia, Singapore, China, to source Soviet titanium to build fighter jets to spy and fight against the Soviets. Fast forward 60 years later, it takes 30 countries today to build a single aircraft. And we can't expect that to change overnight. But certainly, technology is going to aid in allowing our supply chains to become more resilient as we go into the future. Thank you.
So, Partha, for that, and you've actually finished dot on time. And now, we have with us Mr. N. Sivasailam, and I think Dr. Sankalp. Amongst your other qualifications, Mr. Sivasailam, he said that you're the Metro Man of Karnataka, Metro Man of Bangalore, but you also were the logistics man of India, so as to say. So may I now invite you to please give your theme address, and then we will open up the panel for discussion. So Mr. Sivasailam, please. You'll have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself, sir, please.
Yes. I'm audible?
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Dilip, for the introduction. Very humbling, indeed. And coming after some 4 wonderful presentations from my friends, LR, General Pannu, Mr. Madhav, and Partha, I think I have my job cut out, but rather easy. I just try to summarize what has just been told, and I will not repeat them because I agree with each one of my previous speakers. Mr. Sridhar talked about the first mile, last mile, and wonderful. It adds so much of cost. In India, we simply, our competitiveness is actually lost in the first mile, last mile. Our exports lose it in the first mile, and our imports lose it in the last mile. Where when we get them to India, with the result we are unable to value add and then export them back. So value addition India as a destination for value addition is simply destroyed by this high cost of first mile, last mile. General Pannu, right on the trigger, I think we are yet to consider logistics as a very strategic service in India. We consider it as important only in respect of certain essential commodities and military movements. And the rest of the movement in the for the logistics supply chains, for the myriad number of products and services, are just left to as an additive, as part of the service of the product. We are yet to consider it as strategic going forward. I think General Pannu was right on the spot when he said that this needs to be addressed, and I'm very much in sync with that understanding. Madhav literally made the keynote address, and with a wonderful perspective of all what needs to be done, and I share each and every slide and every point which he mentioned, and I will try to amplify a few of them only in my talk. Partho, coming from the practitioner side, you were right when you said that a lot of thinking needs to be done in the way we plan our logistics, and I don't. It's only recently, but there is a silver lining here. At least in the last 5 years, several companies have logistics as an important function, and sometimes going right up to the level of general managers. So I think there is some silver lining in that, but I do appreciate the point that you want it to be done much more, and I share your view on that. Here, I have nothing new to state from what has already been stated, but I will stress on a few issues of strategic nature. As far as India is concerned, and India for the world, not India. I shared General Pannu's view that India cannot be isolated from the world, that will be going back. We need to talk, when we talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, we talk of India for the world. And forming, when we talk of India for the world, we mean India, integrating India into global supply and value chains. Not the supply chain would be a subset of the value chains, but yes, that's where it's possible to do, and considering the opportunity, the COVID opportunity provides a great theatre for making India as part of the global value chains. There are some aspects which needs to be addressed, which I would call them as fundamental. One is, it was briefly touched by Mr. Madhav, that is on the pricing. Now, I would like to differentiate between two types. One is pricing at borders. We had such huge barriers at borders that are last mile, first mile, which was mentioned, become high. But most of these are monopoly borders, monopoly barriers. The cost at our ports is 700% higher than our competitors. Mention was made of Singapore, Dubai. I will add Colombo, which is the closest international port, which is of reference to with which we should price our, which should be our reference pricing. Then I would also add Hong Kong and Port Kelang. In all these areas, the cost of the charges, the ship charges are just about, the vessel related charges are about $7,000 to $10,000. Port Kelang, I was told, is about $11,000 per medium sized ship. But the same ship would have a minimum charge of $54,000 at JNPT, something like 7 to 7.5 times more. And that's the cheapest we have in India. We rest other ports, something like Cochin, Chennai would be upwards of $80,000 to $90,000. So it makes us totally non-competitive. Now, one way, the same thing happens on the inland side with the internal monopolies. We have the railways with a huge internal monopoly, which actually the cost of carrying, India should be easily having something like 60 to 70% being carried by rail if the pricing were optimal. And that's where I would request Dilip also to take it up in FICCI, because you are in a position to bring in the necessary industry pressure to rationalize the pricing of railways. I know it cannot be done overnight, but at least a trend can start so that over a period of 5 or even 8 years or even 10 years, you know that the prices are going to go down X% per annum, and that's always factored into the economy and the way our businesses are structured. This is an important aspect going forward, as otherwise we find that our trucks carry long distances, and the trains carry only cargo, which otherwise cannot be carried by road. This is an important aspect. What I would like to, as a captain, I would like to say, it would not be the issue would not be ease of doing business. The ease of doing the business would be dictated by the cost of doing business. If cost is going to be high, you're going to have a problem, and ease may actually be on an autopilot, but your costs being controlled by us would make it difficult. This is my second aspect of this is my third point, and my final point, which I would like to say. This was touched by Partho, automation, and he did mention. I continue. The one which the point of which I would like to stress is on the making IT more mainstreaming IT even more. See, what had happened is, let me tell you, we were talking about contactless customs, contactless a lot of things, and the industry was asking for it for the last 5 years. During COVID era, it happened without asking. It just happened. A notification got issued as if it was out of the blue, and the finance minister mentioned it. So some of these are basically mindset-related aspects, and I think going forward, if industry associations like begin to assert, can happen. Another aspect of it is about billing systems. Well, blockchain billing systems would be ideal. There's nothing wrong about it. But the point is, let us first start it off with our internal systems, so that our internal systems which involve agencies are addressed, and blockchain is the way to go. Let's not look at it as an international import. Let us do it internally. Internal trade, which is 100 times bigger than our 100 times bigger expenses. And that is one big opportunity which we have, and which we can streamline, and which is in our control. Going forward, international aspects have other issues tagged on to it, such as reciprocity and other things which might need to be negotiated. But there is nothing to negotiate on the local on the local trade. So I thought that the area of automation, instead of we looking at the exports and imports, while we might accept international blockchain related transactions, we need not enforce it on others. But we need to put it internally as a norm within India, which might help this at least our businesses, which is highly fragmented, going forward. But I'm not addressing the issue of fragmentation. I have addressed it in other webinars. But I will sign off with one major submission on our ability to control trade, particularly international trade. One of the major areas, India is not a maritime nation. It was in the past. We don't have India flag vessels, but it might be of some surprise for you to know that the number of India-owned vessels on a foreign flag is second to none. It's much more than the India flag vessels India owned. The India owned vessels foreign flagged is much higher, which says that investments are available, and we need to address certain very small pinpricks on our taxation issues, which and encourage that India cargo. Nobody in the world allows allows cabotage relaxation except India. And these are all nations' preserves. When we talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, we have forgotten, we have just willed away our cabotage for nothing, for no gains. And that's one area where we should actually be telling people that, well, we will be on international norms, but you need to be India flagged. That has got its own advantages when situations like COVID crisis addresses, because having India flag vessels and operating on international waters has a much greater increases your sustainability much more than not having our flag vessels and not having our cargo on foreign not on India flag vessels. So this is a very important aspect. I would strongly advise FICCI and submit to that. There is a bill which is presently being debated in Parliament on the shipping amendments. There is a need for India to have a federal or what we may call a Central Maritime Commission. I don't say that it should start regulating prices. It should not. And I share the sentiments of both Madhav and General Pannu, as well as Partha, who mentioned that prices need not be controlled. We should never do that. But we can always ensure that people are there within the framework. And a framework-based regulation, which the Federal Maritime Commission does, something what even the Competition Commission does in India. It does not interfere in every aspect of corporate businesses, but it does when there is a public issue to be addressed. And I think time has come for us because in the next 10 years, whether we like it or not, we are going to be the third largest economy in the world. It's going to happen naturally. It's like, as people say in health, it's like child mortality and maternal mortality coming down. It comes down because of simple development phenomenon, not because there is a great bureaucracy around. The systems have been put in such a place that it keeps going down. Similarly, we are going to have a situation by which we need to ensure that we have a regulation suited to our trade, or at least our aspirations on the international as well as on the local front. With these 5 points, I leave you to take the debate further. And I would only like to submit that it has been a wonderful presentation from my four panelists who have actually covered a whole gamut of issues which are of strategic nature. Yes, I sign off by submitting that I entirely agree with General Pannu that we need to look at logistics is movement of goods, not just of goods, because people also move along with it, and a lot of things get done, and it is strategic in nature. Strategic as far as businesses are concerned. It may not be the army paradigm and the principles are equally applicable in respect of civilian logistics, if I can say so. Thanks a lot once again for giving me this opportunity.
I think you have to unmute. We are not able to hear you.
Can't hear you, Dilip.
Now.
No, I've just completed. Thank you.
No, I can't hear Dilip Chenoy, please. Dilip.
No.
We can't hear.
Can you hear now?
Now we can hear.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I think So the thing got a bit loose. So I think, first of all, Mr. Salam, thank you very much for your 5 key points and for also giving those multiple suggestions and the 3 agenda items for FICCI, which we will definitely take on. So now we actually move on to the most interesting part of the panel discussion. And I think the first thing what I'd like to do, we have 4 or 5 questions from the participants which have come in the chat box. But I would like to actually put forward a kind of set of questions to each of the panelists just to get a sense there. And Mr. Sridhar, there's a lot of talk about you've been in the logistics space for a long time. A lot of people don't see logistics as a desirable or preferred option for employment, right? And if you don't attract, even a lot of other people would not really think of coming into the logistics business as a first choice of business there unless you're already in it. So how could this change for better? And what role could companies play? And is there a national agenda for this?
Thanks, Dilip. I think if I have to say this 10 years ago, yes, it is always looked at, the second or the third, even when you go to the colleges, when they do the campus interviews, the logistics companies choose it third or fourth. But the emergence of the e-commerce industry about 5-6 years ago have changed the entire, the status of the logistics and supply chain business. But I think one of the reasons, I think there's also a lot of skill sets that are not being provided. So logistics is looked at an industry where people think that it's not very attractive. But today, if you really look at it, I think with emergence of many of these technology companies, technology guys moving into logistics, I think it's going to be the need of the hour today. And I think what is required is basically with the e-commerce emergence has happened, it has attracted a lot more. In the sense, it has changed. Forget about the jobs part of it. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially what I have seen in the last 5 years of having moved into building rural logistics and digital commerce, is a lot of entrepreneurs have emerged out for this business. They're looked at as a big opportunity, and plus the migration. See, most of the delivery system in the metro cities or tier 1, if you really look at it, they all come from the rural part of the country. But today, when they have gone back, I think the businesses are going to rural part of the country. And I think logistics per se, you will see a huge shift, especially when the digital commerce, the habits post-COVID, the habit of the person is also changed to more, digitally ordering, more online ordering. I think this is going to change the complete perspective. And I think it's time for the industries also, the logistics players also to coexist, because there's a lot of duplication that also happens in this business. Because everybody thinks that a tenant and owner cannot be the same. So I think that way it needs to be left to the specialists, because last mile distribution or a lot more warehousing will happen at the district headquarters, which means there's a lot more skill sets that are required at the warehousing activity. There will not, the warehouses of large 1 million square feet, 2 million square feet will slowly shrink, and it will go down to distribution level at a district level, where probably 10-15,000 warehouses will happen. I think government also now need to look at a lot of modernization of their existing warehouses and outsource it. There's a huge infrastructure of government of India which is underutilized. I think with the kind of things that's happening in the rural India and e-commerce moving into local, I think the opportunities in the logistics sector is going to be huge, and there's also going to be skilling. I think the skilling will bring in huge amount of optimization and a high quality of productivity that would happen. And therefore, I see two great opportunities as far as the logistics is concerned. Rural India is going to be emerging as the biggest winner that's going to happen, because a lot of consumption is going to happen there. So there'll be a lot more jobs that will happen in rural India, a lot more entrepreneurship that will happen. And at the same time, I think bodies like FICCI and other people should also try and build a huge skill system around the logistics activity. One is to give general skills to the people in logistics. Secondly, also as per the requirement of the corporate world, there is no specific organization in the country today which I think Madhav will agree with me that in terms of logistics, whether it is international or warehousing or a DGR certification, I think there needs to be a lot more skilling that requires to be done, because unfortunately skilling India, Dilip, you know as very well that somebody skills in, if I have to relate maritime, people do seafarer course and come and work at the ports for doing loading and unloading around operations. I think those things have to be changed. So I think what you are saying that past it was, but I think with the e-commerce emergence, a lot of attraction is happening on the supply chain and logistics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think, General Pannu, when you were speaking and, when the other people were speaking, there was a word used, brittle proof. I mean, what will it take to make India's logistics, the whole supply chain, brittle proof? How do you, given your army experience and background, what would you suggest needs to be done to actually make it more robust and resilient?
Thank you very much, Dilip. Actually, since you speak about the military, let me tell you how the military works, and then from there we can superimpose our models somewhere else. We believe in safety stocks, and we have a predictive model that wherever anything is going to be consumed, close to that, we have those depots where the safety stocks are maintained. And the maintenance scales are over and above the safety stocks. The second echelon is where we have regionalization of inventory. It means that wherever the safety stocks are touched, the regionalization happens to redirect the inventory into those areas where the safety stocks are touched. And similarly, the scales are such that there is some amount of prediction in the consumption rates. Now, in the civilian parlance or in the corporate sector, I suppose the technology would give you a complete trend of what is required in various seasons, in various fashions, whether you're talking about life or lifestyle, and what needs to be consumed needs to be provided for. And if it is to be provided for in an area, it has to be provided in right time and at the right price. If one of them is broken, either the price will go up because it is not available, so there will be too many people demanding the same thing, which has actually run out of the safety stocks, or it will not be provided at all, and then there will be a larger malaise which will set into the system. So predictability and ensuring that the regional stocking is done well, and the last mile connectivity is the one that Mr. Sridhar has been talking about, is so beautifully put into various square boxes. And somewhere I had written down that we have to link logistics to smart cities and smart villages. We have already infrastructure available with the government. We have the post offices who have actually started doing courier service as well. We already have the block development officers in the villages, from agriculture to e-marketing. Really speaking, there's no connect between agriculture to e-marketing. Unless we bring agriculture, the predictability of what is going to be consumed, the farmer is not going to produce that. He produces whatever he's used to producing. But he will land up producing what is going to be sold. And that kind of thing will only happen if agriculture or industry is put into the GEM or the e-marketing system, so that there is predictability. Predictability will give a demand, and demand will go back into how the production will happen. So I suppose there is a large interplay of things, and I think technology is one thing that uses artificial intelligence as engines, and there's a large amount of tracking which happens to a product. If the product is not reaching somewhere else, then the safety stocks can come into play. I hope it.
Thank you. So I think you also talked about this globalization and regionalization. So let me take this to Madhav, Mr. Madhav Thapar, it is said that globalization and globally scattered supply chains have actually exacerbated the impact on production and economy. If you take in different sectors, pharmaceuticals for one. Do you believe that post-COVID we shall see more regionalization of the supply chains towards making them more pandemic-proof or crisis-proof, or will another model emerge?
I think that definitely in the short term, you will see a trend towards regionalization. I kind of covered this also in my presentation, where I think that there will be a lot more trade between proximately related regions, because everybody is kind of scared that a very long supply chain sometimes is not sustainable. But I believe that in the long term, this is a short term phenomenon, but in the long term, supply chains will reinvent themselves and their globalization and a more global outlook will return, because ultimately competition drives markets, right? When you become too regional, you are also limiting your scope to get the most competitive product. And as supply chains evolve, when people gain confidence in the fact and they become more automated, more digital, more standardized, people will go back to sourcing from wherever in the world, however remote it is. The end product is reaching them at the most effective price and in the most efficient manner. So I think there are going to be two phases to this to answer that question.
Thank you. Mr. Sivasailam, you've been very active on the chat box, so I'll just take the two questions really addressed to you. One was addressed to me, but I'll very nicely pass it on to you because you offered to address another related question. That the question was that the flexible supply chain. Some studies have highlighted the possibility of two parallel international supply chains, one centering around the US, another China. How do you see India's position and potential in this context? And the related question to this was that this is from Mr. Menon. As India tries to relocate manufacturing from China to India, logistics bottlenecks become a huge issue. The companies coming to India will not come for Make in India for India, they will come in Make in India for the world. And the only solution he's suggesting is the coastal manufacturing zones next to the port. So, I'd combine the two questions and then request you to just share with us your views on this. And you already told Dr. Sri Prakash that you've answered his question in the presentation. So, Mr. Sivasailam, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this opportunity to address these questions. The first question is really puts in so many words the perspective which was aired by General Pannu. When we are talking about India and China axis and the US, and we are considering that there's going to be bipolar, and how are we going to be positioned in this situation? The thing is very. Let us see the lower. I'm not looking into manufacturing chains and things like that. Technology, US still has a huge. They're far ahead. I leave it at that. I'm only addressing the issue of logistics. Let me tell you that out of the three major shipping groups, 2.5 are controlled by China. 2.5 groups in shipping. That means almost the world shipping trade is controlled by China. And now, don't forget that 200 years ago, or even up to something like 50 years ago, US was a maritime nation, and US had the monopoly. Taking over from Britain, they had the monopoly over the seas, and suddenly they decided, okay, others can take it over. And what did they do? The US went for that is precisely the reason why I broached the subject of the Federal Maritime Commission. Now, you might be able to run the ship, you might be the owner of 2.5 global supply chains, but if the Federal Maritime Commission issues you a notice, they can catch the ship anywhere in mid-sea. that's it. I mean, you had it. And that's the level of capability one needs to have, and it is not necessary. Even EU has it in respect of several aspects of shipping, particularly the ship breaking aspect of it. They do it well, and they do it very powerfully, and that's what we are. Your question is on the exercise of power. So I would like to submit that it was in this context that I made a submission to FICCI that in the ongoing legislation, because we are looking at a shipping legislation which should last us for the next 50 years, and we need to put in that legislation an aspect of Federal Maritime Commission, so that India's commercial interests are addressed. Today, foreign shipping lines operate in India through agents, through shell companies. They call themselves agents, but they're actually shell companies. And most of them have conflicts of interest. And do you know that how many of you would actually know that you never get the original bill of lading? You get the bill of lading issued by the shipping agent and not by the shipping company. And it is all the bill of lading issued by the shipping company, by the shipping agent, is always 10 to 25% more. It's simple value addition for change of paper. And we need to address that through these commissions. And we need to be sensitive to these. These are all the things which India's Federal Maritime Commissions need to do. You don't need to be a huge, you don't need to have 2.5, control of 2.5 or even all the shipping sources, as long as you have proper and regulation based on what I would call internationally accepted norms. I hope unless and until India does that, I don't see India being able to control I'm sorry, I'm actually using the wrong word. India being able to regulate the international aspects of its trade. I wouldn't say India should regulate international trade. I'm far from it. I would only like to say that I would like to be a good member of the international community, but I would like to regulate aspects which relate to me based on commonly accepted norms, widely accepted norms internationally. So I would leave it to that. I would leave it at that as far as this question is concerned. The second one, Menon, you have, I think it was, it is Menon. I mean, your question is fantastic. Let me tell you, this is where I think we are making a big mistake, and I think I would request FICCI to take it up. If you want India's if you want to attract industry into India, we need to have the concept of SEZs and free trade warehousing zones redefined. I want to only state one thing. They are not customs. An SEZ is deemed foreign territory. A free trade warehousing zone is also a deemed foreign territory. We relate it to our Indian Customs Act, which is applicable at the borders. Whereas SEZs and FTWZs are virtually, technically outside borders. So we are not able to, we are all what we require in those SEZs and FTWZs is policemen and not customs personnel. We only need to see that contraband goods which are not allowed on Indian soil are not got into it, are not brought in. Everything else is allowed. But we adopt a customs approach to SEZs and FTWZs and ensure that we kill both of them. Now, unless and until we revive this very simple concept of SEZ, and we don't require, nobody is asking for your concessions, nobody wants it also. They just want it to come value add. If they want to put it into the country, customs applies and they pay their duties or whatever it is. Otherwise, they just take it off and sell it elsewhere with such changes as they do. But we get a lot of employment, we get money in foreign exchange, and that's our benefit. But unfortunately, we apply customs laws to SEZs and FTWZs and therefore end up not being able to attract this opportunity. I thought your question was very timely for me to explain to you this aspect, and I'm hopeful that Dilip, who has been with us, I've seen him many times in conferences in the Ministry of Commerce, in the Department of Commerce. I think he should be able to take it up by making a simple understanding that in SEZs, outside SEZs, at the border of SEZ, you require the customs. But inside SEZ, you require the police. And that's it. They only see whether the goods which are allowed is a contraband or not. And whatever by name you may call them, they only check whether it's a contraband or not a contraband. And that's it. And rest of the things is open. And they need to be under the control of the SEZ authority rather than the... we need to get these changes done in order to make things work. But I'm sure that with an industry support and industry body support, the administration will be sensitive to make this small tweaking, which will create a huge benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Saraman. On a very lighter note, during the lockdown, one of the casualties was that there was no liquor available. But one of the plus points for a lot of people was that, in many US states, marijuana was legal. So a lot of people started web ordering marijuana, and that created a whole set of problems for a lot of logistics and, express delivery and courier companies in India where, nearly, and the customs authority nearly were opening every package with suspicion. But that's just purely on a lighter note. But, Partha, coming back to you and technology, you've heard a lot of logistics experts speak, and you heard the great, opportunity being presented. How ready you think are the logistics companies for adoption of technology? And, keep in mind, Mr. Sivasailam's point that you were wanting this contactless thing to happen, and COVID came, and hey presto, it happened. So how do you think the adoption of technology in the Indian logistics sector is going to happen?
Let me intervene. I just wanted to answer one of our participants, Nutan's question on the on what I would call the Central Logistics Authority.
Yeah, I was going to come to you later, but fine. Go ahead. Yeah.
Achha.
Go ahead. No, go.
Nutan, what has happened is there is a wonderful report submitted by the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, headed by Mr. Vivek Debroy, which has addressed this issue. It's a publication which has been released, and I would request you to kindly look at that publication. I would also request Dilip to look at that publication, and if they think if the industry sees value in that recommendation which has been made by the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, I think you may take it forward. It was not possible for me when I was in service to state it outside the official channels because the recommendation wanted to create a separate department of logistics. And that is one of the key recommendations of that thing. And it was not, I didn't find it, I saw it as a conflict of interest on my part, and to articulate it while I was in service, and then left it to, and therefore suggested that people, others who are not in the logistics division, should actually look into it and then make the necessary. Now that I'm out of it, I can say with a certain amount of conviction that it's a report worth looking at, and both you as a practitioner and Dilip from the association may like to have a look at it. Thank you.
We'll take it on with your successor, Mr. Pawan Agarwal. But yeah, Partha, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chenoy, and let me assure the panel that I've not been a beneficiary of the marijuana supply chain in California. But speaking of whether logistics companies are prepared for adoption of technology, let's first just demographically talk about the logistics sector in India. You've got to look at all the different carriers, trucks of different sizes and shapes, railways, barge, and air. Speaking of trucking, particularly, just as a small example, more than 80% of India's 13 million trucks are actually unorganized, from the unorganized sector. These are small and medium businesses operating often in rural areas, and they're, more frequently than not, extremely manual operations. Are they ready to adopt technology? Absolutely. Almost every single Indian now is aware of the power of data and what data can do. Connectivity has actually enabled that in the country, to where the awareness of data and data-driven applications is extremely high. The readiness to adopt is there, but actually it's not necessarily technology that's the hard part here. The foundation for any successful logistics operation is the efficient matching of demand and supply. Unless I have a common inventory of supply, I cannot match demand as efficiently as possible. By that I mean that there is no central point of coordination currently where all of these majority 12 million or 11 million trucks are actually aggregated to where they can actually see where the demand is coming from, where they could be rerouted, much like Uber is or Ola is, that currently doesn't exist at scale. It exists in particular one or two companies that are now starting to aggregate traffic. There's no silver bullet to technology adoption across logistics. It has to be extremely multimodal. The railways, for instance, transported 175 million tons of essential commodities in just the past 90 days. So this inventory that I'm talking about, as far as technology adoption is concerned, needs to be extremely multimodal inventory. And the predictive algorithms that have traditionally looked at consumer behavior now need to turn the other way and look at supplier side risk and supplier behavior, so that they can add to the resiliency that we've all been talking about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. There's a question addressed to you, Mr. Sridhar, saying that you highlighted the importance of the rural sector, especially agri-logistics and rural commerce. Do you think domestic rural demand in India has the potential to promote consumption and investment in a significant way?
I think which is already started. In fact, if you look at 5 years ago, the kind of reach that the e-commerce had in rural market was maybe to tier 2 town or tier 3 towns, whereas today we are reaching up to a population of 5 to 10,000 population also, where people are ordering on mobile, and these mobile stores becoming an assisted commerce, where the stores are booking orders for the neighborhood people. And I think with the recent policies that government has changed, I think a lot more warehouses in terms of agri will come in, lot more investments will come in that. And as I mentioned that the rapid fulfillment centers of 10-15,000 square feet in each of the district headquarters will come in, because there's a lot of digital commerce that would happen, because most of the MSMEs are also will probably move into a kind of digital commerce. So I think there's a huge opportunity. So there, as I mentioned, as I keep again coming back to your own subject of skilling, that apart from, it's not just taking the logistics or creating that infrastructure, but if they are not skilled properly, the optimization or the productivity levels would be a big challenge. So I think these two things will go. A lot of entrepreneurship that will happen. In fact, Agri is also talking about, like again, what he was talking about, demand and requirement. Now, if you really look at in terms of agri, there is no match of agri inputs and outputs. And I think what we need to look at is what is the agri inputs and what inputs the farmers are looking at connected to the markets, while they're all talking about it, but nobody's talking about logistics. I think that is something that will create big traction. Pharma will become a huge activity. Now, the last point that I wanted to say is that if India has to move into regulated and organized logistics business, I think there has to be a partnership that needs to happen from the industry and the government. A body needs to be created, which I'm sure can regulate and address these issues, and lot of coexistence that will happen amongst the players across. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Sivasailam, just a last question to you, because I think you are best placed to answer this. This is about: do you think that inland waterways would be playing a significant role in the logistics scenario in India?
You have this requires a seminar for me. I'm one of the biggest voters of inland waterway, and let me tell you a very, very simple fact. Indo-Bangladesh trade, export-import. Indo-Nepal trade, export-imports. Indo-Bhutan trade, export-imports. Let us say that it is X. India-India trade, which means India to Northeast India trade, is 10 times X. So, and as you know, we now have the waterways going through Bangladesh right up to Dibrugarh. And the distance is 891 kilometers to the sea. Now, in one stroke, and a little known fact is, I think Mr. Sridhar would be in a best position to confirm. Till 1965, up to the war of 1965, Indian tea moved, and Indian wood and bamboo moved through the inland waterways trade only. It was stopped in the course of the 1965 war. And therefore, the restart of this, as I am speaking to you, I think the inland trade is likely to have India-India trade. That is, the India-Northeast trade is likely to open up shortly. I think I would request you to go through the protocols. They are all public documents, and try to build businesses of Northeast. When you are talking of agri-commodities, you need to address the agri-commodities, organic products of Northeast. They are suitably placed to provide supplies in large quantities, and it has implications for, as was mentioned by General Pannu, it has strategic depth in opening this line, and another line, it's also opening to Agartala, right, the river that has also been added in the last about, I think, 2 weeks ago. So you can actually use the inland waterways and put money into it to make those rivers take at least a 2-meter depth barge right away into the hinterland in the Northeast. So I see huge potential, and say in about 10 years, I expect the India-India trade, which I would call the Northeast India trade, which is actually our internal trade, to increase the exports to be more than 25 times than what it is today. So today it is 10. In 10 years' time, I expect to see it 25x or 25x at the minimum. And if you are able to do better with our investment in business acumen, in trying to promote shipping on the Bangladesh side and provide them the necessary skin in the game and their interest, sustainable interest in the ferry, I think we are in it for a long haul. The most important thing is it provides us a huge strategic depth for India to harness, and we need to do that through increase in trade as quickly as possible. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
My submit on the whole, this is going to be one of the sectors where I would favor large-scale investment and support. Thank you.
Sir, it happened as late as 2010 inland waterways.
No, thank you. I think, thank you. I just, because in interest of time, I fully agree, LR, for that point, but just want to make a comment. In the President of FICCI speech in 1938, the following line was said: the government has neglected the inland waterway system over the last 50 years. It is now time to invest and regenerate that to promote trade and inland waterway commerce at that point of time. 1938, quote unquote, from FICCI President's speech, right? But thank you very much for this. And I think, if I were to just sum it up in one line, the logistics is a strategic service. We need to fix the first mile, last mile, create the proper regulatory frameworks and legal frameworks, and therefore India can actually be a leader in logistics, and the logistics sector can actually grow much faster going forward. And in fact, while the projections are 200 billion by 2026, the post-COVID trend suggests that this will happen earlier. So thank you all the participants, and can I hand it over to Dr. Sankalp for his last words, please. Dr. Sankalp.
Thank you, Mr. Chenoy. I would like to thank all the panelists and chair for this wonderful discussion. Special thanks are due to Mr. Sridhar, who was instrumental in organizing this program. I would also like to thank our ICWS team, including our IT section, Mr. Manish and all others. And I would also like to thank our audience for joining us. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sir.